Hello, we are thrilled to welcome April Phillips to the podcast, along with her darling teammate, Bentley Alexander, who is a therapy dog that helps April in her work as a guardian ad litem. So welcome, April. We are so happy to have you here today. And we would love to start off with you telling our listeners and our viewers what exactly is a guardian ad litem.
So first of all, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I always love, spending time with you guys and talking about some of our favorite subjects. And Bentley likes being here too, even though he's probably going to just sleep through the whole interview. So he might wake up and get interested in a minute. So a guardian ad litem is an individual that is appointed by the court to represent the best interests of the children. I myself do both private family law, guardian ad litem work, and then I'm also a dependency guardian ad litem. So the way that a guardian ad litem gets involved in a case is pretty much, the same. In family law, it's typically because there's some heavy conflict or some allegations that are being made by one or both of the parents, and, someone motions the court for a guardian ad litem to get involved to kind of do the interviews and the investigations to kind of figure out what's going on. Are the allegations true or not? And so that's how that's what a guardian ad litem does. We go in, we do the investigation, we do the interviews, talk to the child or children, talk to the parents, teachers, social workers, counselors, principals, anybody that, has regular involvement with the child, so that we can kind of, get down to it and figure out what's happening or what needs to happen with the child for their best interests. And then the guardian ad litem files typically at the end of their investigation interviews what's called a report and recommendation, which is just that. It's a report that we draft and file, provide to the court with our recommendations as, the guardian ad litem. Here's what I think is in the best interest of the child. Here's what I think would work for the child. Here's what I think might work for the parents, So we kind of wear a lot of different hats as a guardian ad litem.
It sounds like it. It sounds like you have to have a lot of different skills in order to be able to effectively carry out that role. Which leads us to our next question. These skills obviously came about as a result of your years of experience, and we would love to know your why for doing this kind of work.
So I have been involved in the family court system in one way or another for about 22 years. I started my career as a guardian with the elderly and disabled, worked in, guardianship for the elderly and disabled. I did that for about 10 years, really loved it. It was very, very rewarding to get to work because I worked primarily with Alzheimer's patients, so definitely in need and at risk, elderly individuals. And it was very rewarding. But I always knew I wanted to do family law, which is, I think, different because, most professionals that I meet are like, oh, I never wanted to do family law. I just,
Yeah.
But I always knew that would be the path that I would, go towards. And so I did about a dozen years ago, which is how AJ and I met. And for me, it's also personal. My mom was adopted at 4 years old. She was removed from the home by what would have been, like DCF these days. Alcoholic, a drug addict, abusive mom. And back then there were no guardian ad litems. There were no individuals that were appointed to represent children in their best interests. And it just sort of happened. You were removed from the home, you were put in foster care, and that was it, And so it's very personal for me as far as being a guardian ad litem, which is why I also do dependency work on top of family law. Because, I just have that that natural instinct to protect, which is, part of why Bentley's name, Bentley Alexander, used together means great protector. So, part of the reason we picked that name for him as well. So yeah, I think, I just always wanted to be the protector. Again, guardianship with the elderly, now I do it with children. And so yeah, it's just a great protector in me,
Right. It's a pretty strong why.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that children are the beneficiaries of that why. So that's a really beautiful thing. And so could you tell us how Bentley Alexander helps you in your work as a guardian ad litem?
Yeah, Bentley does a great job. So as you maybe can tell, he's a French bulldog, which is not normal for therapy dogs. Typically you see therapy dogs are labs or golden retrievers, things like that. I wanted to go a bit of a different route. First of all, as far as I am aware, just from the research that I've done, I'm the only guardian ad litem in the state of Florida who uses a therapy dog as part of their guardian ad litem work. So that's pretty cool. And then, we're going to be unique. Let's take it all the way and dog, right? So French bulldogs are very loyal dogs typically. He's a little wild and rambunctious when he doesn't have this vest and his special leash on. He's like every other dog. But when he's working, he's completely different. It's like, we put on his uniform and his entire demeanor changes. And he does become that protective individual. I recently had a case, just to give you an example of how he works with me, where I had, siblings, brother and sister. The sister's older, brother's a little bit younger. And there had been some domestic violence and drug abuse in the house, and court appointed me to represent, to figure out what was going on. And so my first visit, I went in, and my first visit with the kids are always pretty low key. I don't ask them a lot of serious questions. It's just about getting to know them, letting them feel comfortable with me, and just kind of observing what the situation might be. Second visit, I go in, I typically start asking a little more, more questions. What are they willing to tell me? See what will come out, what they want to share. And I could not get these children to share much. The little boy just kept saying, I don't know. And the little girl kept saying, I don't know. I don't remember. I don't want to talk about it. And so I don't want to talk about it obviously tells us something has happened that
Right.
She's telling us she doesn't want to talk about. So I said, all right, we're going to bring Bentley in. So I took on the third visit with the kids. And the 6-year-old little girl was very excited to see that every time I gave Bentley a command, he would do exactly what I was telling him to do. Of course, she doesn't understand that he's trained, to follow those commands that he's given. And she said to me, Miss April, I want him to do what I tell him to do. And I was like, that's it, right? So I said, well, why don't we go outside and take him for a walk? And she said, okay, can my brother come? And I was like, why don't you shoot when I go, So I took her out and taught her a couple of his most basic, simplest commands. And within 5 or 6 minutes of just going on that little walk with her and letting her get relaxed, she suddenly turned to me and voluntarily offered some information that she had not volunteered in the past. And so that opened her up to be able to talk to me and, tell me what she had witnessed and what had been going on in the home. And that, I have no doubt, was because of Bentley. I mean, after, a couple of visits, I couldn't get her to tell me much, but as soon as the dog came in, he did exactly what he was supposed to do. He provided her that comfort level, lowered her stress. They say that therapy dogs that work with kids are 87% more likely to tell the truth or to give you information that they would not normally give you. So Bentley is a huge help. And, part of him being A French bulldog is he's smaller. So with the smaller, younger kids like that, he's able to really kind of get up close with them. They can sit on the ground and hug him and wrap their arms around him in a way that a bigger dog, I mean, of course they can do that, but, the smaller dogs, Bentley tends to lay on their lap and really kind of curl up with them, whereas a bigger dog can't do that. And the goal eventually with Bentley will be that he will be a court dog. So he will actually go into court and be able to sit with children and provide therapy for children who have to testify in court. So,
Oh,
Bentley's a huge help. He does really great work. And that case that I just told you about is just one example of the many times that Bentley has gone in both my family law cases and dependency cases and helped get some information that I couldn't otherwise get.
that's
fantastic. Yeah, that's really great.
So I think it speaks to, as you had said, the supporting presence of an animal that's trained to offer that kind of support in helping us almost feel more strong and more empowered.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, again, the protector in me wants to get the information, wants to help these kids, wants to be able to provide the court with proper and accurate information as to what is in these children's best interest. And it's a very difficult job. I mean, we're dealing with a lot of accusations and allegations being thrown from many different directions. Mom is saying this and dad is saying this, and their attorneys are saying something else. And, so again, that's the exact reason why, a guardian ad litem has to come in. And it's super important. I have to get as much accurate information as I can to be able to issue a proper report, making sure that everything I'm saying we can back up. And, Bentley helps with that.
That's so.
A little bit of therapy to me too, it's obviously what we do in family law is a very, very stressful job, so it's I think very good for me to have him with me, and he provides just as much comfort for me as he does for the kids that he works. So
nice.
Yeah. Well, having met Bentley personally, I can attest to that. He's a really, really special teammate for you, and I'm just so happy that he's in there doing the good work with you. Yeah, absolutely. So you've talked about the things that you do as a guardian ad litem. Do you have any favorite challenges in working as a GAL?
I do. So while I hate the higher conflict cases for the children, I mean, obviously it's never great for them. I tend to like those cases a little more, I love my job. I do. I mean, everybody that I talk to that oh, what do you do? And I tell them what I do. And they're like, oh, I don't know how you do that. It's, and I'm like, actually, what I do is pretty awesome. I mean, yes, I see and hear things and experience things that, most people couldn't imagine, as most of us do in family, who work in family law. But yeah, I like the more difficult cases. I like the ones where you really have to dig. You really are, you're there's, like I said, the one parent is throwing out an allegation and doesn't seem like it's true, but you can't take it. You really have to, dig and investigate and talk to a lot of people and spend a lot of time with the child and sometimes get creative in how we're getting that information again, which is where Bentley comes in and, helps greatly. So I tend to like those more challenging cases,
Yeah.
ones that other guardian ad litem sometimes you're like, oh no, I don't want it. I don't want it. I'm take it.
Well, yeah, I know that you'd mentioned high conflict cases and maybe those more complex cases that you really like because you're able to, it sounds like, engage in a lot of creativity in terms of the way that you craft your inevitable proposal at the end of a case. As our society continues to change and the norms surrounding conflict change, we have seen, I think, in the last decade or so, that people seem to be communicating in less civil ways than they used to. It seems almost normalized that it's okay to communicate in certain ways. Are there things that you've noticed in these cases that you've been working throughout the years, that where things are like maybe 20 years ago it used to be this way, but now it's this way?
Yeah, people want to fight. It's unfortunate, but that is absolutely what I see a lot as a guardian ad litem. There's a saying that I use often is when there is a particular parent who may not be behaving like they should be behaving or treating the other parent, in a respectful or appropriate manner. Sometimes I will say they hate the other parent more than they love their child. So it's not that they don't love their child. They do. They love their child dearly, which sometimes is, the reason for the so much fighting. But sometimes they just want to fight. And it's definitely not normal. I mean, I know just in the last dozen years, I've seen that change. 12 years ago, when people fought. That's why, again, us as family law professionals have jobs, right? But it's gotten so much worse. I mean, just, the way people treat each other and not realizing what they're putting their children through while they're doing it. They are often not understanding that their kids are watching, even when they think they're not. They see more, the children see more than the parents think they see. They hear more than the parents think they hear. And they can just sense it. Their kids are like sponges. I mean, truly they are. So when there's that much conflict and anger and fighting going on around them, they pick up on that. They know something's not right. And then you have to add that to the fact that their whole lives have just been changed. They've gone from a household where mom and dad were together and living in the same house to maybe now they're in separate houses and they're having a timeshare and they're going back and forth between the two houses and they're having to, adjust to all of that already, which is stressful and traumatic enough to a child in itself. And then you add the high conflict, situation to it. You add the fighting, the additional anger, the sometimes and often untrue allegations that one parent is making about another parent. And it's just unlike anything that I have seen in my many years in this business. It's just worse over the last couple of years.
Worse. Yeah. You and I talk about trauma because we're both trauma-informed practitioners. And as we know, the old average childhood experience survey, you get 1 point if you've experienced a divorce as a child. Right. And so I think it's so important for parents to know that the CDC is still using that original survey, and divorce is in and of itself a traumatic experience for children. And as parents, it it's incumbent upon parents to do whatever they can to mitigate that trauma. And what you're saying is that we've already got a traumatic thing. I mean, the family is becoming different. Your life, that child's life is becoming different. And now if you add upon that conflict, which, I mean, let's face it, conflict to all of us doesn't feel good. And so you're adding on that negative onto an already hard situation for a child. And I just wish that more parents knew that, or more parents, if they know that, were able to take that into account when they were getting ready to send the nasty text or do something.
Absolutely. One of the things I will recommend a lot in GAL work, and I think as family law professionals, we all see this, is that it is often very important to get a family counselor involved at the very, start of when you recognize the problems there, when you recognize as an attorney that your client and the opposing party, when it's that bad, get a great family counselor involved. Have these people work with someone where they can individually see that counselor. They can together as parents see that counselor to learn how to co-parent and better take care of the needs of that child and keep the child from being traumatized, and find a counselor who can work with both parents and the child or children all together. Skilled counselors know in what order to do that. And I just think it's so important. It's one of the things that I recommend almost always in both family law work and dependency work. Divorce in itself, or the splitting up of a family, but especially divorce, is the equivalent of death. It's, you go through the same stages, and people, they don't realize that. When we tell them that, I think sometimes that they're like, oh, and they kind of hear what is said, but they don't necessarily, because they haven't experienced some of those stages yet, they just don't recognize it. But it is. I mean, I have been divorced myself, and my divorce was not high conflict. It was not angry and mad and, all those things. And my son was 1 when that divorce happened. So as a guardian ad litem, when I'm talking to these parents and I'm making the recommendations and trying to get them to kind of see what they're doing to their children, I often tell them, look, I've been in your shoes. I get it. It's not just that I've been doing this a long time. I have actually lived through the divorce process and had a child that was on a parenting plan for 17 years, which is, that's not, the most normal thing as it is. So, but my son was 1 when it happened. But, I made that decision right from the beginning to say, it's not going to be this way. And this was back when there was no 50-50 presumption of time sharing. It was mom got all the time, dad got every other weekend in a Wednesday dinner visit or whatever. And he hired an attorney. I didn't, for obvious reasons. And when his attorney was like, all right, are we doing this, the standard parenting plan? I was like, no, like he can have him 50% of the time. Like that's what should happen, Until he gives me a legitimate reason to show me that he can't handle it or that there's something wrong, which there wasn't, that, I believe that most of the time that 50-50 time sharing should happen. Of course, I mean, again, that's why we have guardian ad litems, that we are put in place to figure out if that is really in the best interest for the children at times. But, and even if it's not, right, even if it's not literally, you're going to have a dead split of time sharing, it doesn't matter what your time sharing is. You have to learn to respect the other parent, to not involve that child, to keep them as stress-free as possible, and understand that the traumatic effects can and likely will have a lifelong effect on their own physical and emotional well-being. And it will control how they treat people as an adult. It could impact, will they go through a divorce themselves later in life because they have trust issues, or, so yeah, you gotta get some help, got to get a counselor involved, and it's okay to do that, and I think some people think like, we don't need that, we can do this, and all he's got to do is straighten out and do what I want him to do, or all she's got to do is stop this or stop that. But it's rooted so much deeper than that most of the time.
Yeah. So it sounds like your advice to people would be the counselor, get a counselor involved. Think about the far-reaching repercussions of your behavior as a parent.
That's
and
right.
As parents and children are connected, before you send the nasty text, before you leave the nasty email or do something, take an action that is set out to harm your former spouse or soon to be former spouse, think about the connection between that parent and the child. Think about, how would you feel if your child received this text? Because how would your child, if you were doing this to your child, so it's almost like we forget that there's such a strong connection between parent and child, that what we do to that parent, we are essentially doing to that child.
Yeah. Yeah. There's that old saying, if you wouldn't say it or do it in front of your mom, like, don't do it. Right.
Absolutely.
Well, that's exactly the advice, that I will give parents in these high conflict divorces or paternity matters. I'll tell them, like, could you imagine how your child would react if they saw what you said to him or her? If they knew that this was how you were behaving. And then even worse, does that child later think that it's okay for them to behave that way?
Absolutely. We've normalized bad communication, bad behavior. Mm-hmm.
There's enough of that, right? All over society. They're picking up, these kids, the things that we might not want them to pick up anyhow, just from the way our world has changed so much. The parents certainly shouldn't be adding to that.
So even if we're mad at each other, we can be good models for our children.
Absolutely.
You don't have to be all sunshine and rainbows, but you can reply and send texts in, I'll use a Bill Eddy, brief, informative, friendly, and firm.
Right.
You don't have to be best friends, but please keep it civil for the sake of your children.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And that is another advice that I try to give parents all the time. So absolutely. Well, it has been a joy getting to spend time with you and our Mr. Bentley. And we look forward to hearing more stories from you, from your teamwork with Bentley and in helping, and in helping these great kids through hard circumstances. Well, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to coming back and talking with you guys again. And I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day.
We will. Bye, Mr. Bentley. Bye, April.
Bye.